Welcome to Technology Simplified. I'm your host, Will Slappy, and today we're joined by Rick Murray, the Director of Physical Security at IT Voice. Rick has decades of experience in security, fire, and life safety systems and surveillance. And he's built systems that not only protect assets, but also work seamlessly for the people who rely on them. Today, we'll explore his insights on physical security, accessibility, and the latest innovations shaping the field. So Rick, great to have you. And to get us started, I'd love to hear a little about your journey. What first drew you down the path of physical security?
I think that what really, first of all, I had a job doing security at Collins years ago, and I really just wasn't passionate about it yet. But my passion really came when tragedy hit so close to us, and it was the Columbine incident in 1999. When that incident occurred, I had two young children at home. And I took it home and I slept with that every single night, knowing that my kids go to a school that this could happen at. And so that really just motivated me, and it made me dig deep to see what can I do, what am I doing, and what should I be doing to make an impact and a change in our community. And that's really what started the passion.
Yeah, and for maybe some of our younger listeners who aren't familiar with Columbine, that was really the first major school shooting that happened. And Rick, I remember it like it was yesterday. That we all heard that on the news and rocked, I think, everyone's world. Certainly can relate to you. I didn't have kids at that time, but have kids now, and it's certainly something that comes across my mind. Tell me more about how that moment, shaped the way that now, you approach physical security.
At the time we had some cameras at schools. We even maybe had a panic button at the front door at the school, but they really just didn't have a plan. And we didn't know we had to have a plan back then. That's the bad thing about these types of incidents is it opens our eyes to our deficiencies in our security plan and all these different things. And so what we had to do is we approached the school district. I approached them directly, and I was fortunate to be a part of a really great school district who listened, and we implemented a lockdown plan to start controlling the flow. I mean, you can think about it, Will. Do you remember when you went to high school or even maybe elementary school, you could go to any door and just open it and walk in? I mentioned that to a young man yesterday when we were talking about this podcast, and he's like, oh my gosh, he couldn't believe that they allowed all those doors at the high school to be unlocked. And now, they just funnel them all in through a specific door, and they're doing things differently. And that's what we're really talking about is implementing the culture change to allow us to have a higher level of security at the schools. And like I said, they let me lock down every school. We did a delayed or a controlled entrance at the front doors, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and most of your listeners are familiar with. They're seeing it every day. At first, it was a big change, but everybody really appreciated it because of that Columbine incident.
Yeah. So did you get any sort of resistance, or what was the reaction from the different schools and community? How did they respond when you introduced some of those new security measures?
Actually they were very receptive because I was getting phone calls from parents. And because we're in a small town in Wyoming, and they were like, what are you doing? What are you doing about this? And they were, and some of my business friends, were like, is this about money? Do we need to start fundraising to put money together to get some safety for our kids? It was a huge community thing. So no, I can say, remembering back, I didn't have much pushback community-wise, but there always is a few, right? There's always a few. You stand in line at the airport. How much pushback do you see at the airport because of security? So there's always a few haters, but for the most part, everybody's really receptive.
I definitely see that a lot. The TSA pre-check and clear certainly helps get you through that line a little bit faster, but there's always somebody that has opinion about something. So obviously a lot has changed, in access control measures, just the quantity of it. Now it seems like, there's a lot of places, right? Offices, hospitals, obviously schools that we've talked about. How has the industry evolved since some of those early implementations to what it is today?
The technology within the technology is pretty awesome. Let me say it like that. So let's pick on cameras a little bit. Cameras back in the day was a video. They showed a video, and it wasn't very clear. You've all seen the video of the gas station, theft or robbery, and you can't even make out the person. Now the cameras have evolved so much that there's technology within the technology. And what does that mean? It's called metadata. The metadata within the camera is the one that's now, let's pick on a big department store. He's using cameras not only for security, but also to tell the corporation which aisles at that store are used the most, and which portion of the store has the highest value because of foot traffic. I mean, that's crazy. Who would have thought that cameras would be being used for retail and improving businesses? The other day I went and had my car washed. I pulled into a car wash, and the funny thing is we installed the cameras at this car wash, but I never knew they were going to be using a camera to detect my license plate that tells the system that I'm a member, and it lets me get my car washed and just no delay, just opens the gate and lets me in. That's being done through a camera and an access control integration. How awesome is that? Who would have thought that 20 years ago would ever happen? Most people thought it was magic when we did automation at all. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to think. We have the same sort of program, and take our cars to get washed as well. Now I'm going to think of you every time that I go pull my car through there, because you're exactly right. The camera sees the license plate on the back, and then that arm raises up, and you roll through it.
Let me tell you about my curse. I'm cursed. Most kids or people go to Disney and they go to the haunted house and they just enjoy the experience. I'm that guy the whole time going, now how did they do that? How did they do this? I question everything, and I've always been that kid who questioned everything, and this is what you grow up to be, right? I always look at things all the time and say, how is this working? And then I've added, how can I make it better? What can I do differently to make this thing a better, take the technology to the next level?
Yeah. Well, and I love what you said too there about like in the retail as like one example where, we've always known historically that the checkout line was one of the places that people obviously have to stop and they're waiting. And so some of the highest margin products are at checkout because, you're sitting there waiting. What do? You look at the magazines or the candy or the gum or the drinks or whatever, right? Which are really high margin, products and, single serve type stuff that's easy for people to grab. And, I don't know what the margins on it, but I've heard this really high margin. But it's cool. It sounds like there's other hot spots, right? Somewhere around the bakery or that end capsule or, next to the hamburgers. I don't know what it might be, but, really cool to not only from the security, but then the business value that they can give. So, what are those other exciting things or advancements that has piqued your interest the most recently?
One of the things that we do is we integrate technology. So we advertise, that we bring all your technologies together. And because we're so diverse in our physical security group, we can cross all the lines with no conflict. What does that mean? That means I can integrate the access control system to the intercom system at a school. So not only does the door being propped open notify the staff that there is a door opened, but it can create other events, other activities like first thing we do is dispatch communications, right? Get the word out and all that kind of stuff. But what it also identified is that they had a lot of door hardware issues at our particular school that they needed to get resolved. So it's not necessarily the door was propped, it just wasn't closing all the way. So a student walks through that door and he thinks it locked behind him, but in fact it wasn't propped per se, but it was stuck. And it identified other issues. And so we are using technology to do a better job of managing our facilities and keeping our schools safe. And keeping people notified that there's something going on when it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But I think that's been the greatest thing for me is because we're closing those holes. We're closing those holes, which at the end of the day improves security. You don't get to hear about the guy who did pull the door and it was locked and he kept on going down the road. We don't get to hear about that. No incident was created, and that's I just pray that that's happening at all of our locations, and which is good. That's good news. No news is good news when it comes to this type of safety stuff. So.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And the last time we talked about this, I love some of the other things you shared about some of the cameras that can detect like the external cameras that can detect people approaching a building, and it can tell the difference between a deer or a raccoon and a human, and the can even alert central ops or whatnot to be able to take a look at the video feed to see, hey, is that nefarious activity, and potentially even alert the authorities before a person has even attempted to break into a building. So proactively able to monitor, especially after hours and nighttime and things like that, be able to proactively monitor that stuff. So there's all of those advancements are so neat to see. And I love the fact, I mean, the message I'm taking from what you're saying is it's proactive, right? It used to be, oh, something happened, and now we're going to the camera, the grainy, feed that you were talking about earlier, and then trying to figure out what happened, versus so much of the technology is now shifted to be like, hey, this door is propped open. What's going on? Let's send somebody there. Let's look into it. Hey, somebody's approaching the building. Let's put eyes on it before they've even tried to enter. All of those different, and then I'm sure there's more along those same lines, all those things to proactively prevent something from happening versus just retroactively reacting to something that's happening. So for organizations out there that are looking to improve their physical security, what's some of your advice for them?
Well, first of all, I think is people need to build budgets and build those budgets soon and keep building them, even if you don't use the budget this year because you haven't found the need. But you need to have that money put aside and be willing to put it forth, I guess we'll say, onto a project. There's a lot of ideas and a lot of technologies out there that can improve things. I mean, let's just take, for instance, like you just said, the cameras used to tell us a story, right? That's what I always used to say. Cameras tell the story of the incident. They don't necessarily prevent it. Well, now there are things you can do to prevent an incident with those cameras having all that metadata and capabilities of triggering notifications. I mean, cameras are even being used to detect fire. I mean, that's pretty amazing that a camera is being used to detect a fire and to what level that it's at and what do we need to do to respond to it. But I think the biggest thing is be moving forward. Find those holes, hopefully before an incident occurs, identify those issues, communicate with your professional, your reps, your sales reps, or bring in people like myself to the job, and let's identify what those holes are and where we need to be putting our money to. And then educate, have a plan. You gotta sit down and think about what's the worst case scenario. What are we protecting from? And then if you do all that, your system will not only do that, but it also protect or notify with other incidences. Some you didn't even think about, but it will in fact absorb those situations too. The biggest thing that I think about too, Will, is, and now that we're talking about this, is let's take, for instance, a panic alarm. I used to push a panic alarm, and it would take like 90 seconds to get that notification pushed through the entire network. Now it's less than 5 seconds. So within 5 seconds of me clicking that button, someone's responding to the signal. I mean, that's pretty awesome. That's pretty amazing that we have that kind of response. And our authorities, as much as I've had false alarms and all these kinds of things, they don't shy away from panic alarms and emergency notifications. We're having a lot of problems. You watched in the news with false alarms, especially when someone calls in a fake signal. That's different than an actual certified signal coming from a technology, from a school or from a hospital. And that response is still severe, and they're on it. And that's pretty awesome, though, that we can get that with technology. So keeping that technology up to date is important too. If you have an older version of these technologies, they're still taking 5 minutes or 90 seconds, just depends on what technology you had. And if you get a new device, a new communications device using the internet, using the IP space, we can do it within 5 seconds, and that's awesome.
Yeah, and in those sorts of emergencies, whatever type it may be, time is almost always of the essence, and that can make a huge difference in what that result may be in an incident. So, well, we're getting close on time. So, what's one last thing that you wish people understood better about physical security?
I think the first thing is to just embrace the technology. Don't let it intimidate you or think your life has to change. Because if it's done right, if the technology was done right and implemented correctly, it's there to complement your life and improve things for you. And honestly, most people at first they're like, "Oh, this is the stupidest thing ever. I can't believe I have to do this now." But once they implement it, they find that it saves them time, it saves them other things in their life, and they accept it. And then it becomes like that young man I talked to yesterday, he couldn't believe that we used to let everybody come in all the doors. That was probably the biggest complaint is we've all had that class that was all the way down the hallway, and you have a limited amount of time. And so it's embracing what the needs are to keep security high and safe and important. And then also, like I said, make it every day. Every day you have to be thinking security, whether you're driving home, driving to work, and then communicate. Tell. If something doesn't look right, tell someone about it. Don't assume, and people will benefit from it.
Yeah, if you see something, say something, as they say in TSA.
So
well, guys, that wraps up another awesome episode of Technology Simplified. Big thank you here to Rick Murray for sharing your incredible experience and insights on physical security. Rick's perspective reminds us that technology is most powerful when it serves people, keeping them safe, supported, and able to go about their day with confidence. Whether you're managing a school, office, or any organization, the key takeaway is clear. Physical security is most effective when it's practical, user-friendly, and focused on people. I'm Will Slappy, and we will see you next time on Technology Simplified.